Hey there, it's Brett from Booster Therapy. I wanted to take a quick moment before today's video to remind you that in the month of July 2020, we are giving away one custom commander deck valued at about $300 USD to anyone who comments across all of our videos. So we're going to take all of those comments, pick one of them from all of the videos, which we post one a day, and one of you will be the lucky winner. So make sure you're commenting, liking, subscribing to all of our videos, and enjoy! Welcome back to Booster Therapy and another episode of Commanding Presence. Today we're breaking down another Brett's build. It's a patron build and we're working off of a $50 budget. So this is a budget commander deck that hopefully will be a lot of fun for all of you. If you haven't seen the update, or which I'm sure you've gotten the reminder at the beginning of this video, make sure you're commenting, liking, and subscribing. We're giving away a free commander deck at the end of the month, so make sure you're a part of that. Without further ado, in this episode of Commanding Presence, we're going to break down Subira, Tulzidi Caravanner. So, Subira is a 2 colorless and a red for a 2/3 haste. Pay 1 colorless, another target creature with power 2 or less can't be blocked this turn. And then an activated ability of 1 colorless and a red in tapping Subira. And you can discard your hand until end of turn whenever a creature you control with power 2 or less deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So an interesting way to get to draw cards, but we're really going to look at abusing as much as we can here on top of the card draw, is getting in with some unblockable shenanigans and working off of that $50 budget. Keep in mind, it was a $50 budget that was roughly what, while I was building this, the cards were around that. Cards could go up a little bit in price or down, so it's roughly in that neighborhood. The first thing we're going to talk about is ramp, of course, and the first card we have here is the Iron Mirror. The nice thing about this is it's a creature, it's a 2-mana ramp for red, and it's a 1/1, so we can sneak it in and hopefully draw off of it if that is what we're in need of. The Burnished Heart, another one that is 2/2, so it works with Subira, but it also is a great ramp spell for a deck not playing green. The Nyx Lotus, we are in a mono color, so mono red. Hopefully our devotion is always 2, 3, or 4, and it makes this card pretty unstoppable. Prismatic Lens, another really great budget 2-mana ramp spell. Solemn Simulacrum, one of my favorite ramps. It also, again, plays alongside of Subira, where we can get this in as an unblockable creature. A Soul Ring, because even on a budget, I'm going to try to fit that Soul Ring in there. It is just that good. The Cold Steel Heart, another one that was recently reprinted, so we saw the price come down a lot on this card. It's 2 colorless, comes into play tapped, you pick red for the color, it's going to tap for that red, so more 2-mana ramp. The Mind Stone, another one that has snuck down a little bit in price. At times this has been like a $6 card, shockingly enough, but it's 2-mana ramp. It also replaces itself if we need to. Commander Sphere, another good budget ramp spell that you can sack and draw a card. Ever-Flowing Chalice, this could be 2 or 4, it really depends on what mana you have freed up, so it's a great ramp spell. And of course the Spinning Wheel taps for any color, but it also gives us that secondary utility of tapping a creature down, which in a pinch really is going to benefit us. Next, we're going to talk about some of our card draw outside of Subira. So Subira offers a ton of card draw, obviously. Getting to sneak things in, discarding our hand, and getting a brand new hand is always going to be positive. But we want some other card draw as well. So the first one we have is Humble Defector, a great budget card draw spell that makes friends on a board. This is a really fun commander card. You tap and draw 2 and then hand it to somebody else that's willing to play ball with you and go back and forth. Faithless Looting, we're going to work a bit off of that discard because Subira does discard so much as well. So does Faithless Looting, so we'll have some other mechanics here that benefit from that. The Mad Prophet, one because I love how crazy this guy looks, but it's a recurring, somewhat of a looter spell. It's a backwards looter, and it's budget-friendly. The Bomat Courier, another budget-friendly spell, draw spell. It's also a creature that plays well off of Subira, so we get a lot of value out of the Courier. Thrill of Possibility, it's that instant speed. Tormenting Voice, which is also in here, so just getting to pitch 1 to draw 2 for 2 mana, very, very good. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about some of our utility cards throughout this, both in our artifacts, enchantments, things that we utilize to just get mean and get in with the damage we're looking for. The first one is the Crystal Slipper. It's a really good way to get haste. It also doesn't buff too much. +1/+0. Oftentimes we're working with a lot of 1/1s, so we can still sneak it in as unblockable. But that haste, a budget haste equipment is always really good. The Thopter Engineer, another great way to give haste to our artifacts. And we'll talk a bit about that. Obviously, Thopter Engineer makes a Thopter herself, but there are a lot of artifacts in this deck. The Dragon Mantle. So, I was thinking of different ways on a budget that we could get something, make it unblockable, but then get it in and turn that unblockable into something fierce. And Dragon Mantle gives any of our creatures that fire breathing, and we get to draw a card off of it. The Contagion Clasp. It's our budget-friendly Contagion engine where we get to proliferate, and proliferating is really going to matter with this deck. I'm sure you've already guessed it by now, but we'll see it in a couple more swings here. The Dolmen Gate. This way, if we can't make things unblockable, we don't have the mana for it up, whatever it is, we can fearlessly crack into people and just keep swinging to draw those cards that we need to draw and get us the answers we need to win the game. Rage Reflection. This way we don't have to increase the power of our creatures to take away from that draw mechanic, but it does give them double strike. So as we're making these unblockable creatures, they're now pinging twice a turn, and we're just cutting down the delay and speeding things up. The Meek Stone. This is one of the more expensive cards in this deck, but I would argue it is one of the most important ones. Meek Stone makes it where any creature with power greater than 2 may not be untapped during the normal untap phase. So this locks out all those big nasty creatures, and it doesn't punish us in the slightest. We have everything basically is 2 or less, so we get to keep untapping and keep getting in. And the Whisper Silk Cloak, because if we lose Subira, if it becomes restrictive, we still want ways to be unblockable. It's also another great doubler as a Shroud mechanic for Subira on a budget. Thinking of things like Lightning Greaves that are a little bit more expensive, it functions a lot like that for us, just a little bit more costly. The next couple cards are going to be our Pump Aftermath. So we have a couple spells on a budget that we can play after we've made things unblockable, and if we're trying to get in for lethal damage, because we have quite a wide board state, we have 2 spells that can help us get a little extra in there, especially if we have Double Strike. The first one is Burn Bright. It's an instant speed where it gives all of our creatures +2/+0. So this might take away from us drawing, but at a point where we're using this, we're not likely looking to draw, we're looking to do the damage to win the game. And the next one is Dynacharge. It's a very similar thing. You overload it to give +2/+0, just like Burn Bright to everybody, but it gives us the utility of doing it for just one creature if that is ultimately all we'll need in a pinch. Next, we're going to talk through largely the first creature base of what makes this deck effective, and that's going to be Goblins. So Goblins are notorious for having 1/1s or powers 2 or less, and we're going to play a ton of utility Goblins that we can have a ton of fun with. So Pashalik Mons, the first one, it lets you deal damage as Goblins die. It also gives you a sack outlet for Goblins where you create more to do damage, so it really just builds into infinity with the right amount of mana. The Goblin Bushwhacker, another way to give haste to everything that's happening in a turn, especially if we have our Krenko Mob Boss, which we'll review in a minute. It gives them all haste in a pinch, and it gives us that little edge, especially if we're working with a lot of 1/1s and we can make them 2/1s. This still lets them be unblockable Subira, and it also gets us that card draw. There's Krenko Mob Boss. We're hoping to go a little bit wide with this deck and have a ton of unblockable 1/1s and get tons of different triggers off of that. So Krenko is one of the more expensive cards, again, when you're working with a budget, but it is a very important card for the success of this deck. Goblin War Chief, making our Goblins a little, it's a ramp spell for Goblins, and it gives them all haste. The Goblin Matron to get us that Krenko. It's kind of like a way to put 2 Krenkos in a deck without breaking the rules. The Goblin Pile Driver, especially against your blue opponents. We all hate blue, and we know we really in our hearts do hate it. This one gets around it and helps us swing in for a ton, especially as we have a bunch of 1/1 Goblins. The Legion War Boss, it's kind of like a similar Krenko idea. It's a cheap way to make a lot of 1/1s. Krenko Tin Street Kingpin, again, we're just doubling down on the getting beefy, getting wide, and really beating in as best as we can. The Mog War Marshal, it's 2 mana for 2 1/1s. Skirk Prospector, this I thought about including in ramp. It's a good 1/1 for 1. It belongs in the Goblin side of this deck, but it is also a great ramp spell. We're making all of these tokens. It really frees up some extra mana to do big things later on. The Goblin Instigator, another 2 1/1s for 2. A Frenzied Goblin, this one I love because we can attack and make this unblockable, and then we can make a creature not able to block. So it just really builds on that Subira mechanic of being tough to get in our face. The Clamor Shaman, it's the same thing as the Frenzied Goblin, where you can just attack and make something not able to block. And a Goblin Rally, making 4 1/1s for 5 mana, a nice budget way to get that board going wide. The next are a few more of our utility cards to help us with the 1/1s and the damage we're doing. So the first one is Raid Bombardment. Whenever a creature with power 2 or less attacks, it deals 1 damage to a player or planeswalker that creature is attacking. So it helps our goblins do that much more damage and just be that much more vicious. And then, of course, the Cavalcade of Calamity. It's the same kind of thing as Raid Bombardment, dealing that 1 damage whenever we have a 1/1 attacking, or a 0/1 for that matter. And then, of course, Mimic Vat. As people are board wiping us and they're trying to get rid of our Krenko, we can exile with Mimic Vat and then just keep that in our wheelhouse as something that we can put on the board. It has haste, make a ton of tokens, let it die, rinse and repeat, do it over and over again. So, if goblins aren't enough, the other way that we're going to really abuse what is good about this deck and that proliferating mechanic is, of course, Infect. Infect works fantastic on a budget, and boy, when you can make Infect unblockable, it gets really hard to handle. So we have the Core Prowler. It's a 2/2 with Infect that can be unblockable. When it dies, it allows you to proliferate. The Iron Claw Mirror, where it's a 1/1 Infect that can get bigger when they block. It's also one of the lower mana cost 1/1, so we can get in early with it. The Plague Mirror, this one I love because it's 2 mana for a 1/1 Infect, but it is also ramp for us. And there's a lot of ramp in this deck, shockingly, which lets us thin out the amount of lands we have to play. The Corpse Cur, this one gets us one of our Infect creatures back if it dies, and it's a 2/2 Infect that we can make unblockable. The Ogre Menial, it's a 0/4 Infect with Fire Breathing. This one should be the most fun, and hopefully not a clear threat right away, just because it's like, well, you got to tap out to do anything special with it, sure, but we love that. And the fact that we can make it unblockable and then attack makes this thing pretty devastating. Next one is Razorvine, a first strike in Infect. Again, a 2/1, which is the most important part of this. The Necropede, a 1/1 Infect for 2, another budget 1/1, or another low-cost Infect creature, get out there early. And then we have a Phyrexian Digester, a 2/1 with Infect for 3. And the Fallen Ferromancer, so an Infect 1/1 that you can tap and deal 1 damage to any target. I believe it should be any target. It wasn't redacted at that time or errated, so it is now. But so it can tap and deal damage, and again, it has Infect, so we can kind of do that in the wings and just deal it to a player and start stacking up those counters and then look to proliferate over and over again. Next, we're going to talk about some of our just straight up utility creatures, things that help us win in other ways or just help us lock the board up for ourselves. The first one is a Stigma Lasher. This 2/2 Wither is when it deals damage to a player, that player cannot gain life for the rest of the game, and there's no way to interact with that, which is fantastic. That's exactly what we want on a budget. So this one we can make unblockable, get in the way of whoever's gaining life and getting out of control, whoever wants to try to kill us with Aetherflux Reservoir, whatever they want to do. This really just stops that. Brawlin is a new card from Commander 2020. This thing is great because we are going to discard a ton of cards and draw a ton of cards. Whenever we discard, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's just another way to go for that go wide strategy with Cavalcade and all of these 1/1s. It's another way to start burning that down as we're dealing tons of damage. The Dark Dweller Oracle, a great way to sacrifice creatures and then get a little card draw, which again is something that lets us win the game. More card advantage, the better. Squee the Immortal, because it just gets to keep coming back no matter how we use it, whether it's to sack it to Pashalik Mons, or make it a sacrifice in some other way, or a chump blocker against that evil thing that just is getting in the way. We can recast it over and over and over again. The Hope of Girapur, we can make it unblockable and stop somebody from playing any of those pesky spells for a turn and give us a little bit more time. And the Goblin Crater Maker. One, it's a goblin, which is fun, so it helps to build on all that synergy, but it also is great for handling colorless non-land permanents, especially Eldrazi. If somebody's playing Animar and getting those big Eldrazi out, Crater Maker literally kills one of them. Especially if you got it with Mimic Vat, you get to play that and just rinse and repeat that ability. That's also really good. Next, we're going to go through a little bit of our removal and then a bit of the lands, and that are going to be our Subira budget. The first one is Impending Disaster. We have a lot of different ways to build mana. We have a ton of mana ramp off of rocks and creatures and the Skirk Prospector, so we don't mind if lands get destroyed, and Impending Disaster is the budget-friendliest way of destroying everybody's lands. Jaya's Immolating Inferno. If we get a wide enough board state, let's say we have something like 14, 20, 30 goblins, sack them all to the Skirk Prospector, pour all of that mana and deal 3 damage each to each of the heads of your opponents. Also, it just helps with even handling some of those threats that are already on the board. Chaos Warp, you're playing red, you should play a Chaos Warp. Boom Pile, one of the budget-friendliest board wipes in the game. It's a straight-up gamble. You got to win that flip to make it happen, but if you do, you destroy all non-land permanents. Into the Core, 4 mana to exile 2 artifacts, dealing with some of those combo pieces, altars, whatever it is that is getting in the way. This helps you to answer those. And of course, Shenanigans. It's the same kind of thing, dealing with artifacts, but it's repeatable and it's budget-friendly. We can dredge this to put it back in our hand and destroy another artifact if it's in our way. And the last little piece we'll talk about is the lands, which is basically all mountains when you're working on a budget, but we do have enough in the budget for an Inkmoth Nexus, giving us 1 more Infector. That is Subira on a budget, Tulzidi Caravanner. Hopefully you all enjoyed that. Make sure you hit that thumbs up on the way out. We love doing these deck techs and Commanding Presence. Hopefully you enjoy it. If you'd like to see something special featured in a future Commanding Presence, please share your ideas. What questions do you have? We want to make it a part of our program. So thank you so much. This is Booster Therapy. You have a wonderful rest of your day.